Hello, my friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family.
Third time's the charm.
Yeah, we won't get into it, but yeah, here we go again. So we have actually 60,000 people at least evacuated in California, and this is in Orange County. Intense fires. We talked about this yesterday on yesterday's videos that the conditions were ripe to set up for some of the worst fires we've seen so far, which is kind of unimaginable with the season that it's been.
Things are so ratcheting up.
They sure are. Wow, tens of thousands of homes evacuated. And as we look over here, you can see this is from the fire in the Silverado Canyon. Obviously, the air quality is not going to be great when you have that going on.
No, you want to get some air cleaners if you can.
And think about this. I mean, this has been all year long for California. It's been year after year. So we have a new fire in Redlands, this is San Bernardino County as well. And 10 acres, but rapidly spreading because of the windy conditions. As we had said yesterday, thankfully snow has come to Colorado. So the fires in Colorado are perhaps going to be a thing in the past, let's hope.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for that.
And let's pray for some rain or snow or both to fall upon California and put out those wildfires.
Absolutely.
We talked about 120,000 lightning strikes in Australia last week, and now we got 2.24 million in 2 days.
Can you say plasma discharge?
Yeah, exactly. It's an electric universe, and as the magnetosphere is in decline, we're going to see more events like this. You know, if you guys are familiar with the electric universe theory, well, the Grand Canyon, for instance, isn't really water erosion. The thought is that was created by plasma.
And you'd want to check out the Thunderbolts project, right?
Yes, and can you imagine the power? You know, what that explosion, what that would have been like to create something like the Grand Canyon?
I feel like it would probably rock the Earth.
Yeah, and then when we look to Mars, there's actually evidence of plasma discharges many times worse than what must have happened in the Grand Canyon.
I know, poor Mars.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to Mars as far as that history. So we have 1.3 million being evacuated in Vietnam after 13 people were left missing in the Philippines because of Typhoon Molave.
That's an interesting name.
Yeah, they have interesting names for sure. This is another one that they're bracing for, and this storm is feared to worsen the country's flood situation, in which at least 150 people have lost their lives. And meanwhile, the storm wreaked havoc in the Philippines after it struck the nation on Monday, and leaving at least 13 people missing because of a mudslide.
Yeah, let's send our prayers to them.
So there's a new study out talking about earthquakes and gaining some insights into them. As we see, new insights show factors that trigger earthquakes. The main takeaway I got from here, besides the fact that they said you can't predict earthquakes, tell that to Dutch sense, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Is that they say that even ancient faults that have not been active in a long time, most people think that faults that have been stable for a very long time will never cause a serious earthquake, but they found that any kind of fault can trigger many different types of seismic events. That means a seemingly benign fault could suddenly rupture, resulting in fast and dangerous wave propagation. Do you know if you're by any faults at all? So if we look at this map, you could see there's tons of faults on the western U.S., and especially like when we look up towards Cascadia, look at that. Those are all faults. All those lines are faults. And when we look to Nevada, Nevada is like one big fault. I mean, it's just covered in faults. And the western part of Utah, you see a major series of faults going through there as well. And of course, California, we're well aware of the risks. But when we look on a day-to-day basis, we don't see many earthquakes really in New Mexico, unless they're down right by El Paso where all the fracking is going on. Although there is a lot of fracking going on through the border with Colorado as well. But you see these faults in areas like, I don't know when the last time was I saw a quake around Santa Fe or Albuquerque. It's not common. But the potential is there because you do have these fault lines. And even if they haven't been active for thousands of years, doesn't mean that they can't wake up.
No, it doesn't.
And over here, what you're looking at is all sorts of records falling. All-time cold records and snow records just falling all across the West. Look at that. Boy, I'll tell you, we've been in the 70s. It's been nice. And today the high is like in the 30s. Same thing with tomorrow. So records are falling everywhere. And we have Spokane, Washington, shattering a snowfall record on Saturday, 8 inches of snow. The previous record was 0.2. That was back in 1957. So this is Spokane's snowiest. It's not even winter yet.
No,
It's snowiest October, and as far as the record books go. So it's trick or treat time, but it looks more like it's ho 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 time.
Yes, they should be putting Christmas lights up there.
And Great Falls, Montana, too, 11.2 inches of fresh powder, thrilling the skiers out there, breaking the previous record set 95 years ago. And so October 2020's record is 27.7 inches. 18.5 was the old one back in 1925. That was back in solar minimum cycle number 15. The average is 3 inches. That's a pretty big difference, don't you think?
It's pretty huge.
Rapid City, South Dakota, 4.5 inches. Previous record, 4.1. As we look at some beautiful wintry scenery there. Missoula, Montana hasn't seen this weather in over 100 years as well. 13.8 inches of snow out at the airport.
That's amazing.
In fact, the Northern Hemisphere has gained over 300 gigatons of snow above the 1982-2012 average.
Could that like tip the Earth?
No, I don't think we're in any danger of that, but the Earth may tip for other reasons.
Yeah, it might.
Yeah, I mean, we have the magnetic pole reversal. And, it's interesting because a lot of scientists don't think that there is crustal displacement, but yet there's evidence of that everywhere.
Well, a lot of that evidence keeps coming up and up and up.
Yes. And so when we're looking at what's going on with Zeta, it looks like it may be another Louisiana hit as we're looking at the spaghetti models here. Here we go again, guys. Here we go again. Hang on tight if you're anywhere from eastern Texas over to the Panhandle, but especially if you're in Louisiana or in Mississippi or Alabama. It looks very, very likely that you'll be facing a Category 1 storm or a tropical storm, but you never know in these times. There's ways of, let's say there's ways of injecting steroids into these storm systems, so to speak.
And isn't that the third time?
Yeah, third time's the charm. So I wanted to include this just because there's a lot of talk about EMPs and CMEs. Here's 17 misconceptions about EMPs, electromagnetic pulses, which if we did have an EMP, then that would mean we're at WAR more than likely. Yeah. And so good time to prepare. We got Taiwan and China, and it just seems to be ratcheting up all the time there. There was reports of more Russian submarines in the Atlantic, especially around the UK, than they've ever seen, ever. So there's a lot of tension. China, India, who knows? It's good to be prepared. So, number one, the time required to find replacements for the major transformers in the United States would be at least 3 years, even though most people seem to believe it would just take months. So, without the fact that if there was an EMP, more than likely that means we're at WAR, you would still have years before things were back to quote-unquote normal, whatever that new normal is. And there's a new normal every day on this planet.
Oh my gosh, isn't there? Yep.
Now, the severity of an EMP attack can vary greatly. Just because an EMP goes off does not mean the entire grid would be knocked out. We don't know that, but it depends on where it was. The experts say more than likely it would be towards the central U.S. And back, I think it was 2017 or was it 2018? I did a show with Asia. Asia is a friend of ours who's intuitive that also channels Archangel Michael. And she had gotten back then that there would be an EMP set off above the Dakotas in the United States this year, Originally, she saw it in September, and then she told me earlier this year that she thinks that because of people's intentions and praying and setting out the positive vibes, it was pushed back, but she felt it was still likely to happen in November of this year, which would coincide with the you-know-what as well. And, again, she saw it over the Dakotas, and so that would mean also, like Canada, most of the Canadian cities would be knocked out as well.
Yeah, they would.
Perhaps even parts of Mexico. So it can vary greatly, and it really can vary depending on where you're at, too. So the EMP would need to be detonated very high above the country. And 3 pulses will go off on an EMP rather than just 1. And so they call them E1, 2, and 3. E1 is a fast pulse that can induce very high voltages along electrical wiring cables and communications equipment. E2 is the easiest to protect against, very similar to lightning, and E3 is very different from E1 and E2. It's very slow to the point most people would not even use the word pulse to describe it. The E1 is the pulse that deals the most damage to electrical components and devices that we use every day, and therefore it's the pulse we need to worry about the most. The Earth's magnetic field acts on electrons of the EMP to change the direction of the electron flow at a right angle to the geomagnetic field. The interaction of the Earth's magnetic field produces a very large but brief electromagnetic pulse over the affected area. The E2 would likely not be an issue for critical infrastructure because the U.S. government has protective measures against lightning strikes that could also be used against the E2. The E3 is similar to a geomagnetic storm, and that is something we have to be very, very aware of as well, because more than likely with the magnetosphere being as low as it is, and then as we move into a more peak activity of this solar cycle, the likelihood of a CME or 2 coming our way increases, and the likelihood that we'll have some outages. So we need to be aware of that as well. The E3 can produce geomagnetically induced currents in long electrical conductors like telephone lines or transmission lines. And, many of you guys know that's exactly what happened with the Carrington event, going through the telegraph wires and sparking fires. Because of the similarity between E3 and solar storms, it's common to refer to the solar-induced geomagnetic storms as a solar EMP. Solar EMP is not known to produce E1 or 2 effects. So that means that a solar CME, really, is not going to knock out the electronics or make your vehicle inoperable, which can happen with an E1. Larger electronic devices like transformers and sensitive digital electronics are going to be most effective by the EMP attack. So by disconnecting power, such as unplugging power cords from electronic devices in combination with using an effective Faraday cage for shielding, you can reduce the chances of a particular item being affected by an EMP. Anything that's plugged into the grid and or not shielded is going to get fried, especially if it's an E1 pulse. Many vehicles will still run after an EMP. It's been found that older vehicles in particular have fewer sensitive electronics, but even cars up to 2002 or 2003 can still possibly run after the EMP. So if you have that old 76 Chevy in the garage, hang on to it. When the EMP goes off, gas stations most likely will not be working. So you're going to have lots of gas stockpiled up, or a horse or 2.
I would love that.
Yeah, that's what she's banking on. So while old vacuum, and I should mention too, simple motorcycles would be okay as well. You could get around with those. While old vacuum tube radios will possibly be less affected by an EMP, they will contain solid-state devices that are highly vulnerable, so have a spare rectifier on standby. Contrary to what many people think, an ammunition can is not a very good Faraday cage. Copper, galvanized steel, and aluminum will be the best materials to use for your Faraday cages. Make sure it has an unpainted surface. And guys, as always, thank you so much for your support on Patreon and Ko-Fi. We couldn't do it without your help. God bless. Stay prepared. Namaste.
Namaste.